Hello everyone, Wayne Motts, the President Emeritus and Historian at the Gettysburg Foundation for a segment of Walking Wednesdays here on the Gettysburg battlefield, and we're up at Seminary Ridge, and we're with two of the movers and shakers up here at Seminary Ridge, and we've got a new one. So I want to introduce Dr. Judy Morley, who is the Executive Director of the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, if I got that correct, and the president of the Seminary Ridge Historic Preservation Foundation, and Cody Esch, who is the Director of Education and Interpretation for the Museum and Education Center here on Seminary Ridge, one of the most iconic places in Gettysburg right here. And Judy, we got to say welcome to you because you're new at this, so
thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here at this historic site. I mean, you said it, it's one of the most iconic buildings in Gettysburg. Dates back to 1832, and the museum is just such a fabulous place, and I'm thrilled to be able to be part of this organization.
And we're glad you're here. And I go around at the different places I've been. I've interviewed the park curators and everything, and I said, now this is the job you want to have. So Judy's job, yeah, you want to have it, but yes, you got to do work. This is
got to do work, yeah.
This isn't all museum play
right.
for everybody. This is real work here at Seminary Ridge. But Judy, welcome here to the Gettysburg community, and you've been part of the community, so you're not new to the community here. Welcome to the museum. And this is sort of special to me because I worked here in this building for quite a long number of years as the head of the Adams County Historical Society. I have a long history here and remember all of that. And boy, they've got a lot more history because when they opened this up, now everybody, Cody was just telling me a bunch of stuff off camera that I didn't know because he's got all this new information.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick part of his brain today. So Cody, why don't you tell us why don't you give us an overview of here? So what did this place look like during the Civil War?
Certainly. Well, thanks, Wayne, for having us as part of this series. It's a pleasure to join all of you. So this building, as we've mentioned, is built 1832. It's a period of growth here on the western side of Gettysburg at what originally up to that time was Oak Ridge. So that's one important distinction between then and now, is that even when the buildings are starting to be constructed here in the 1830s, by the time we get up to the 1860s, when the Battle of Gettysburg is taking place, we would have been standing in the middle of quite a lot of oak trees that surrounded this building, and we're all up and down the ridge line here. But there were three structures that stood here at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. The original building, which goes by many, many names through the years, originally just called the Seminary Edifice or the Seminary Building. And this is where all the classrooms are, the dorm rooms, the assembly area. There's a dining hall and a kitchen on the first floor, as well as the living quarters for the caretakers. Pretty much if you were attending the Gettysburg Seminary for a theological education, everything you needed was right here in this building. And that'll be the case from 1832 until 32 years after the battle in 1895. The other two structures that are here at the time of the battle still stand. We can't quite see them from where we are, but there's one to the south of us on the southern edge of the campus, and that's the home of the seminary's founder and first president, Samuel Simon Schmucker. Today it's the offices of Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. And that home was built in 1833. On the northern end of the campus is right along Route 30 today, the Lincoln Highway or Chambersburg Pike historically. That's the home of Dr. Charles Krauth. It was built in 1834. Dr. Krauth doesn't begin his tenure here until 1850, but he and his family were living in that house at the time of the battle. And both of those structures look a bit different today than they would have in 1863, but all three of the originals still stand amid the other buildings that are here on the campus of what is now United Lutheran Seminary. There's also this historic tan-barked path, which was the original entryway up to the seminary building. That's part of our mile-long walking trail that interprets these stories here on Seminary Ridge. There was also a small farm lane that ran along the western side of the ridge, basically right next to where the National Park Service Avenue is today. So there are a couple of changes, but we can certainly still see the blueprint of what this campus looked like as this battle is raging in 1863.
Yeah, and we've got additional buildings here from the time of the battle, but if the soldiers were standing on this ridge today, they would know the three buildings that were here 161 years after the fact. And obviously, when you're John Buford and you arrive here on June 30th, 1863, you're going to come up here west of town. This place is an important place west of Gettysburg. Cody, tell us a little bit about what probably happened right near here where we're standing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are standing at the approximate location where we believe one of the most famous conferences, if you will, that happens at the Battle of Gettysburg takes place, and that is the arrival of Major General John Reynolds and his conversation with Brigadier General John Buford. We are on one of these 4 major western ridges where the first day of the Battle of Gettysburg is fought. And as fighting is happening a mile to 2 miles west of us, out along Herr Ridge and McPherson Ridge, on the morning of July 1st, there's a lot of movement happening right around this building, not least of which is the use of the cupola at the top of the building, 70 feet above where we're standing right now, as a major observation and signal post. And then it will be reportedly there that General Buford is when Reynolds arrives with federal reinforcements of the Union First Corps. And it's right around this general vicinity where on the morning of July 1st, at about 10 o'clock or so, General Reynolds, several of his staff officers ride up, and there's this famous shouting back and forth between these 2 officers. For those familiar with the movie Gettysburg, released in 1993, this is the approximate spot that it interprets as well as where General Reynolds and his staff arrive. So we have a famous building, 2 famous generals, this famous meeting. It doesn't get much better than that.
No, and we're gonna leave here, and we're gonna go up to the top up there for Buford, so we can get a look at that at the very top. But first, before we do that, we want to say, Judy, thanks for joining us, because Cody and I are going to go. She's got stuff she's got to do, everybody. She's got important things that she's got to do.
I've got stuff to learn.
We're gonna play Gettysburg here. So Cody and I, we're gonna hit a couple stops here on the Seminary Ridge campus. We're just so grateful for the Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center for having us up here and going over that. And great history. So stay tuned. Up on top next. All right, everyone, we're up at the most famous view in Gettysburg, on top of Schmucker Hall, the Lutheran Theological Seminary main edifice, old dorm. How many different names do we have?
Many different names, yeah.
Cody. And this is the best view of Gettysburg, and the reason why, of course, armies want to use this for observation, like the Union Army on July 1st, 1863. So, Cody, take us to July 1. Why are we here? And give us a little background on some of that.
Certainly. Well, Wayne, we're in a structure that, it served many purposes through the years. It was mostly a piece of this building that was used for ventilation. As hot air would rise through the building, it would cool down the lower floors. But in the summer of 1863, it's being used for a vastly different purpose. First civilians who were up here, Henry Eyster Jacobs, recent student at Pennsylvania College, soon to be student at the seminary. He's up here on June 30th for some amount of time. And then as the Federal cavalry under John Buford starts arriving on the battlefield, arrayed to the west and to the north of us, Buford sends out his signal officer, First Lieutenant Aaron Jerome, who is going to be probably the first military figure who makes use of this cupola. And throughout that evening of June 30th, Jerome is here, other cavalry officers are here, reportedly Buford is here at least once that night. And then by the following morning, as fighting is beginning off to the west of us, shortly after 7:30 a.m., this is going to be a prime location for Buford, for Jerome, for several civilians and students here at the Lutheran Seminary, first getting a view of a distant battle, but then trying to make sense as the battle is coming a little closer to the seminary and civilians start to filter out. Now Buford is going to start to come up with this delaying action plan, especially as he's contemplating the arrival of the Federal infantry under John Reynolds coming up from the south. And this is reportedly where Buford is when Lieutenant Jerome looks to the south. He's able to see rather uninterrupted for the better part of 2 miles down toward the Round Tops. He can see, as he referred to it later, as the corps flag of General Reynolds. And this gives him the indication that he can alert Buford that Reynolds is arriving. Buford comes back up here to this cupola, and we have this, one of the most famous conversations perhaps that takes place on the Gettysburg battlefield, takes place with Buford in this cupola, Reynolds on the ground, kind of yelling back and forth with one another over the din of battle.
Yeah, and I said 1 July, we can't forget Buford got here on the 30th. Jerome, the signal office, certainly people would have been up here on the 30th. Then you got the civilians here too, everybody. And we know the civilians are in town getting on buildings too. Yeah. Everybody's in a place where they can actually get. So to have this as a military observation post for July 1 going to be very important for the Union forces that are actually here. And I think our viewers, maybe they haven't heard, but there's famous exchanges made when Reynolds supposedly says, "What's the matter, John?" and yells up from the bottom, and Buford reportedly says, "There's the devil to pay." That's here. But certainly Reynolds and Buford here. And do you think Buford goes down to meet him? Reynolds comes up. What do you think this looks like?
So it's interesting because Aaron Jerome is this main figure who gives us these two primary accounts, 1865 and 1867, so just after the war. And there are some differences between the two. One of which he says, if you read between the lines, it seems like Reynolds is coming up, on his way up when this conversation occurs. And then in the other, it sounds like this occurs with Reynolds still on the ground. So it's one of those things that we have to kind of parse through the sources, acknowledge some of their differences, in addition to the fact that, as many eminent scholars of the battle have pointed out, this doesn't totally match with any of the accounts left behind by Reynolds' aides, who say the initial meeting happens on McPherson Ridge. Or even Peter Culp is a local Gettysburg resident saying the meeting happens in Gettysburg itself. I think there are 7 eyewitnesses who reported about this meeting, and they have 3 distinctly different locations they remembered it happening. So,
of course, that's why we call it history. And if you all knew the answer, you wouldn't need us. That's the reason why we're here. That's the reason why we're here. But we should, we definitely should say that another reason why we have this issue, of course, is I think the viewers may or may not know Reynolds dies July 1, and then, of course, unfortunately, Buford dies of disease on December 16th. So the two principal people both die in 1863. One, just a short time after being either here or there. And we do know they ride from here and they go out here. So this is left here, and then there's fighting out west of town, and then right up against where this building is at a barricade that's made by Union soldiers. And that is going to be our next stop.
Wonderful.
All right, last we left you, Cody told us that John Buford and John Reynolds went out here to the first day's battlefield, left the building that is right over our shoulder where we just came from, and now we've walked just west of that building to where the defensive perimeter is going to be for this fight on July 1st, 1863. But Cody, why don't you pan around, and Abby can take the camera and pan with you. Where exactly are we? We know the building's behind us.
Yeah, so we are sort of where Seminary Ridge starts to taper down to the west and goes into this swale between Seminary and McPherson Ridges, which is always, I think, a good lesson for walking these battlefields, is to get this sense of terrain and topography, because it doesn't seem like we've gone very far from the top of the ridge, but we've gone down quite a bit, and it goes down even further, and then it goes back up to this next ridge line. But this fighting is going to be happening out on McPherson Ridge for most of July 1st, from give or take 10 in the morning to almost 4 in the afternoon, with the exception of that noontime lull. Right alongside Route 30, the Chambersburg Pike.
Why don't you pan around? She can follow you, and we can go,
Right alongside Chambersburg Pike, or Route 30 here, the Lincoln Highway. And we can see where it intersects then with the line of monuments, or you might be able to see the bus out in the distance there on this side of Herbst Woods or McPherson Woods or Reynolds Woods. Take your pick for how that ridge wood line has been interpreted over time. And that's going to be the main Union battle line for the First Corps. The 1st Division arriving initially, John Reynolds at the head of it, falling, of course, not long after his arrival as the highest ranking officer killed at Gettysburg. And it's at about that time that we're going to see a lot of movement right through here. This is a reserve position for men of the 6th Wisconsin. This is where Dr. George New is establishing the first major battlefield hospital. And you have these soldiers moving back and forth across this position, and the fighting consuming the better part of 6 hours as the day wears on.
So why don't we pan around? Let's go a little further, and we come all the way back around, just so everybody can see. Now, we got modern buildings up here, on the campus, but we'll come back around to where we were, and then she can have the Schmucker Hall back over on top of it, so everybody will get.
And one thing just for context is where we just were, and we could see the YWCA and some of these trees. On the other side of that, another major roadway that has an impact on this first day of fighting, the Hagerstown Road, or the Fairfield Road, modern Route 116, which sort of marks the left flank of the Union line, as sort of the southern boundary, if you will, for much of this fighting throughout July 1st. So we're sort of pinched right between these two major roads here, Route 30 and 116 today.
Now, we could spend 2 hours talking right here on this spot, because this spot, by the way, we should let everyone know, this is owned by the Lutheran Seminary here. It's not owned by the federal government. This is battlefield ground that's been in private hands since what, 1830 or before, when they moved out here west. Still here, still preserved, still open, that you see. So it's a great job that we can come here and tell some of these stories. But
and neighboring ground from our friends at American Battlefield Trust here on the west side of
absolutely,
Seminary
American
Ridge.
Battlefield Trust. We got to mention that. They're the guys helping preserve this stuff as well. So we've got a great view shed here because people have worked on this. Yes. Everybody. So Cody, you mentioned, now we could spend 3 hours talking about battle, and we're going to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version here where we're at. So this is where the Union Reserves come up. And what do they do up here? Because we're right next to here, as there's fighting going on out west of town.
Certainly. So we have James Wadsworth's 1st Division is first on the field with the infantry fighting out at McPherson Ridge, and they leave one regiment behind, the 6th Wisconsin, famously commanded by Rufus Dawes, and they're going to move up toward the fight at the railroad cut, just opposite Route 30. And then at this position, right behind us, when the 2nd Division starts to arrive, John Robinson's division, one of his brigades under Gabriel Paul, is going to stop at Seminary Ridge. And by this point in the late morning, early afternoon period, Major General Abner Doubleday is in command of the field. And Doubleday will later testify before the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War before Congress, as well as in his official report. He calls what we can see in part behind us, recreated today, he calls it a precautionary measure. And it's this barricade that is constructed hastily by the men of Paul's brigade. We're getting to a point in the war where if men have the opportunity and the time to build up or dig in, that's becoming a little more popular by this point in time. And in this reserve position on really this last ridge that is possible to defend west of Gettysburg, Doubleday believes that if federal forces break on McPherson Ridge, there's one last place for them to defend, and it's right here on Seminary Ridge. And so the men of Paul's brigade, led especially by soldiers of the 16th Maine Infantry, they're going to start taking down lower hanging tree branches. The Seminary Grove came basically right out to about where we're standing. There would have been more trees here then than there are today. It was sort of a picnic grove-esque atmosphere as it would have appeared. They're digging up stumps, they're digging up rocks, they're taking down fence rails from an orchard near the seminary and along Chambersburg Pike, and they're piling these up. One soldier says in the 7th Wisconsin, William Ray, he says he remembered it was about 2.5 feet tall. Another soldier says that it went just above their knees. Others would talk about how it bent to the west and curved in toward the seminary buildings at the crest of the ridge. It took the shape of a semicircle. And Charles Tilden, colonel of the 16th Maine, would later draw a map a couple decades later, which included this barricade. To give us a sense of connecting the places we've been so far, one of the soldiers out here late that morning, early afternoon, is Abner Small, a major in the 16th Maine, and he would later be the regimental historian for that unit. And he said that as they're building the barricade, he looked up at the cupola and he noticed, and right on cue, we can see some folks standing up there. He says that he could see officers there and they were anxiously pointing in a northern direction. And we can see that that is the arrival of Robert Rhodes's division, 8,000 Confederate soldiers coming down the Carlisle Road north of Gettysburg. So we can kind of piece together the timetable of when this is happening. And the men of Paul's brigade, they're going to be shuffled off to the right end of the 1st Corps line, nearly a mile north of us toward Oak Ridge. And that leaves this position open then for the 151st Pennsylvania, which will fill in here shortly thereafter as a reserve.
And so at around 4 o'clock, 3:30, 4 o'clock, the line collapses out behind where the viewers are at the McPherson's Ridge area and out west of town. The lines collapse north of town. Now they've got this nice barricade, so they're going to come back into the barricade and fight right here. And what's that attack look like, Cody, briefly?
Sure. So the 151st Pennsylvania, I mentioned a moment ago, is in reserve here. They've gone out and they are the last regiment to fall back from McPherson Ridge. They're basically surrounded on 3 sides, outnumbered multiple times to 1, suffer heavy casualties. And they've now fallen back here with 3 Union infantry brigades, which will be arranged along the barricade, which was several hundred yards long from end to end. The piece that's here today is just sort of the center piece of it that's recreated. There are 21 cannon up here on Seminary Ridge, I think somewhere in the ballpark of 2,500 Federal infantrymen. And the Confederate attackers are the men of William Dorsey Pender's division, 3 Confederate brigades, 2 North Carolina brigades that are sandwiching Abner Perrin's South Carolina brigade in the middle. There's a lot of Union artillery support, as I mentioned, which is blasting away at the men of Alfred Scales's brigade. North Carolinians are decimated in that attack. And then right here at the seminary building itself and at the center of the barricade, Abner Perrin's brigade, especially the 1st and 14th South Carolina, they realize that they can't hit the barricade position head on, so they're going to keep creeping to the right. And as they ultimately do that, they'll find the end of the barricade, outflank the federal forces, and drive them off of Seminary Ridge. And now, for the second time in probably less than an hour, the 151st Pennsylvania finds itself the final federal regiment on the line. And ultimately, as a result of July 1st, between McPherson and Seminary Ridges, that regiment has lost reportedly about 72 to 74% of its strength. It's one of the larger regiments on the battlefield here at Gettysburg, and it has lost 3/4 of its men killed, wounded, captured, or missing as a result of maybe about an hour's fighting alone here on July 1st.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to cover, when we can't hit all of this, or we're going to adjourn from here and go back a little bit and talk about the building as a field hospital, because this is a field hospital while all the fighting's going on.
Yes, it is.
Wounded people inside there while it's still going on. And Cody, it's my understanding that when these men broke or were retreated, that the colonel of the 151st Pennsylvania, George McFarland, that he was shot on the north side of the building. At the same time, the Confederates are coming in the south side of the building.
Correct.
And the length of the building's about, what, 100 feet?
Yep.
And so you've got the Confederates coming in the southern door down there, while you've got the Union Army trying to get crowded in to the lower door right here on this building. So right at the opposite end of the building for July 1st, 1863. And then it was a Union Field Hospital. Then it's going to be a Confederate hospital. Then it'll go back to being a Union Field Hospital. And we want to talk a little bit about that next. But we're right here on the fighting. This is where the Union defense will be for July 1st. And you just explained all that, and we appreciate it. So let's go and take a look and talk a little bit about the building as a hospital.
All right.
All right, we just moved from over the barricade over, and we got everybody's cutting the grass, so it's about the last grass cut we can get in on the fall. And we came from the barricade over to the south side of the building. And we mentioned earlier that the Confederates are coming in this side. There was a doorway over here behind me that was on the ground at ground level, where we know the Confederates are coming in, and of course the Union Army coming in on the other end. So the Union forces have this as a hospital. You mentioned that, Cody. Talked about how it was a hospital before the fighting out there. Now, after the fighting goes through here and the Union Army retreats off this ridge, this is going to be a Confederate possession up here where we're at. So these Union soldiers in the building are going to fall as prisoners of war, and then they're going to be Confederate. So what do we know about the hospital? We're talking the fighting up here, but this was a huge Civil War hospital.
It really was, yeah. I mentioned briefly at our last stop that as the soldiers are arriving from the 1st Division, 1st Corps, one of the folks who is here is Dr. George New, sort of an underappreciated figure, but he had been the regimental surgeon of the 7th Indiana, and now he's surgeon-in-chief of the 1st Division, 1st Corps. And for those familiar with battlefield medicine, we know the name Dr. Jonathan Letterman. He had established that hospitals would be created at this division level, and this will start as that division level field hospital. Now, there had been men being brought in here earlier in the morning of July 1st. Yeah. It's essentially an aid station. Triage is being performed, and now, as the battle is unrolling, we will start to see, by day's end, July 1st, somewhere in the ballpark of about 200 patients are already here, all Union soldiers. Fast forward a couple of days then, and you're going to start to see some Confederates brought in here, and the hospital just continues to grow, and it will ultimately become a general hospital where men of both armies are treated. We know the names of about 500 patients, and we continue to grow that list. We continually find additional information about previously unknown patients. We know that it was about a 90% U.S. hospital, but about 10% of the patients here are Confederate. And the final will be here until September 16th. Lieutenant Colonel George McFarland. He'll be here for 2.5 months.
Wow. Wow. And so, Cody, for our viewers, some of them may know, who well-known would you say would be in the building that they might be able to know?
Yeah, so the two highest ranking officers here, I think, both well-known figures from Pickett's charge. We have James Kemper, one of the brigade commanders in George Pickett's division, and Isaac Trimble, one of the division commanders, of course, in that attack. Both treated elsewhere first, which is one of the distinctions of this hospital, being a general hospital. These are not all men who were wounded right outside this building and brought directly in. Many are as a result of the first day's fight. but in the days and weeks that follow, as hospitals are being consolidated around Gettysburg, especially a lot of those Confederates or even Union soldiers who are wounded elsewhere in the field, they're brought here after first receiving treatment somewhere else.
Yeah. And we would say that most of the Union wounded here would be First Corps units,
yes.
units that were right out in front of where the building is located. It's got such a fascinating history, both in the battle and then as a field hospital. And then the soldiers are moved out of here to be consolidated over at Camp Letterman. Is that right? So they're going to get, most of them, they're going to get, if they're not moved out of here to go to the railroad station, go home, they're going to end up going to Camp Letterman.
Yeah, we see a lot go to Letterman. We see several go to York General Hospital,
okay.
York, 30 miles east of here, a hospital that had existed since the Maryland campaign in 1862. Some men are even taken directly to Philadelphia, further
yeah.
points, but quite a lot do end up at Letterman as well.
And I just wish that we could have done this in 1863, and I wouldn't have an airplane going over right now. Everybody, we're fighting the folks here. But anyway, hopefully we've got some good audio that you can hear. But Cody, I can't thank you enough, and I wanted to say, if people want to come here and visit, tell us about the website, the hour. Tell us what they need to do.
Certainly. Well, thank you for this opportunity, yeah. Wayne. This has been great. If folks are interested in visiting, our seasonal hours during the main months of the year, if you will, are 9 to 5 every day. But keep an eye on our website, seminaryridgemuseum.org, and you can see
yeah.
our hours there that will change as we get into the winter months. We're open on a more limited schedule, but we are open year round. Cupola tours are available, usually 7 throughout most days. We have other educational and interpretive events that are available. And the museum itself really kind of focuses on 3 major topics. The first day of the battle, which of course we focused on today, the story of this hospital and Civil War medicine overall, many human interest stories that go along with it, Mrs. Ziegler's petticoat that is placed at the top to be used
right.
as a hospital marker to indicate as a flag, George McFarland's tenure here, the stories of nurses and surgeons and some sectionalism that plays out as people are arguing back and forth with blue and gray being treated side by side. We delve into those stories here. And then the story of race and religion. This, of course, being a Lutheran seminary, has a unique aspect
yeah,
that we don't
sure
always
does.
cover on Civil War battlefields. People of faith,
right.
students who are attending here who come from both North and South, the African-American experience dating all the way back to the first black
right.
student here in Daniel Alexander Payne in 1835. So we really do touch on a number of aspects. But visit seminaryridgemuseum.org. If you go to our events page, you'll see everything that we have to offer. We also have seminaryridgeeducation.org, where we have some educational resources
Okay,
as well.
and so on behalf of the Gettysburg Foundation, one of our museum partners, we've got a lot of places that you can come and visit. On behalf of the Gettysburg Foundation, we want to thank you for coming out. And for you viewers of our Walking Wednesday, here's a great Walking Wednesday that a lot of people don't think about up here at Seminary Ridge. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. And on behalf of the Gettysburg Foundation, the nonprofit partner of the Gettysburg National Military Park, we hope you will like, follow, share all the videos and get people excited about this Civil War history, just as we are, and about the preservation of our Civil War heritage. So thanks.